Greetings friends, my name is Pivovarov and now we will dive into the top news of this day. This morning the Russians hit the center of Kupyansk, a city in the Kharkiv region located 10 kilometers from the front line. As a result of the morning shelling, 2 people were killed and another 10 people were injured. These are the Ukrainian news for coffee. Just imagine that this happened in your European, American or Asian city. The media will call it an act of terrorism, and after a while some organizations will probably claim responsibility for the attack. And in Ukraine such attacks have been going on for 426 days and will continue on. And it is always done by the same terrorist state, Russia. Today, an S-300 missile hit the museum. According to Oleg Sinigubov, head of the region military administration, there are no military facilities near the building. The Russians specifically targeted the civilian population, and as in any war, military positions are also shelled. It is hot near Avdiivka, Vuhledar and Bakhmut. Various experts say that we should withdraw from these cities, but this will only give new opportunities for Russian attacks.
We can't give up Bakhmut because it will help expand the fighting front and give the Russian troops and Wagner a chance to take more of our lands. Volodymyr Zelensky, president of Ukraine, in an interview with Al Arabiya.
In particular, the capture of Bakhmut could open a place of arms for Russia to attack Kramatorsk and Smolensk in the Donetsk region. In order to repel future attacks, our military leadership is working. Today, Volodymyr Zelensky held another meeting of the staff and the commander-in-chief. They update information on the situation on the battlefield, in particular on the most difficult areas. The commanders of the operational strategic groups of troops reported on the progress of hostilities in the areas of the front line. Each of the directions of Ukraine's defense is important. We have no right for Ukraine to have weak points. Also at the meeting, the results of the regular meeting in the Ramstein format, which took place on Friday, were summed up and considered. Currently, according to the president of Ukraine, and its defense forces are becoming stronger, but they must speed up the pace of arms supply, because every day of delay is life of our soldiers. I will just remind you that yesterday the strategic communication coordinator of the US National Security Council, John Kirby, said that with the improvement of weather conditions in Ukraine, the Russians may launch an offensive on several fronts at once. Therefore, now the talk about a possible attack by the armed forces of Ukraine may be even premature. But as we have already said more than once, we here in the rear know that the blow will be strong, unexpected, and effective. Otherwise, why should we conduct it? The EU provided Ukraine with another €1.5 billion, part of the annual package of macrofinancial support. The head of the European Commission, Ursula von der Leyen, wrote about this on her Twitter page.
We will continue helping Ukraine resist Russia's aggression, keep its institutions and infrastructure running, and conduct crucial reforms. Ursula von der Leyen, president of the European Commission, on Twitter.
The Kremlin considers the West to be its existential enemy. That is why Russia is waging a hybrid war against the entire West. Therefore, Russian aggression aims not only to conquer Ukraine, but also to try to split the EU itself. Unable to oppose it with military force, Russia is working to split the United Europe from the inside, exporting the vulnerabilities of democracy. Russia seeks to shape Europe's information agenda by investing resources in promoting its propaganda. For years, the Putin regime invested in Europe's energy dependence on the Russian Federation in order to use it as a weapon in a hybrid war when the time was right. Moscow uses Western politicians, journalists and businessmen loyal to it, corrupting them to promote its own interests. Russia actively cooperates with far-left and far-right, in particular neo-Nazi movements in Europe, in order to popularize Euroscepticism. To put an end to the hybrid threat of Russia, it is necessary to contribute to the victory of Ukraine in this war. Ukraine is the key to solving the Russian problem in Europe and the world.
Обговорили рішення щодо зброї.
We also discussed decision on weapons and ammunition that are still being implemented by our other partners in the European Union. This is the case when people's lives directly depend on the speed of delivery and the implementation of decisions already made.
Now the Kremlin is trying in every possible way to advance the narrative that the war against Ukraine, which they call a special operation, is a response to the NATO expansion. Foreign Minister Lavrov spoke about it yesterday, and today Deputy Chairman of the Security Council of Russia Dmitry Medvedev spoke about it too. What the problem is that NATO did not expand and did not plan to expand. Especially after in 2008, Ukraine and Georgia were promised a map, but in 15 years neither we nor Georgia received it, although both countries were subjected to military attacks by Russia. And understanding what kind of lobby Russia had in Europe and currently has in the same Hungary, for example, the thought creeps into the mind that we might never have joined NATO. However, now, after Russia's military aggression, NATO is expanding. Finland has already joined, and Sweden will join soon. And there, Ukraine, Moldova, and Georgia are not far away. But I beg you, do not pay attention to the statements from the Kremlin, because they are again beginning to scare with nuclear weapons and the destruction of humanity. We have already heard this blackmail many times, and if we are caught, then we will never stop. So maybe they should be stopped on Ukrainian soil. And now I want to tell you a little about what we Ukrainians are fighting against. We are fighting against Russia, but it's not just a state, it is another social contract. Recently, a new blog of the Russian political oppositionist Andrey Pivovarov was published on Radio Liberty site. It would seem that, like an ordinary story for Western countries, an oppositionist publishes his point of view on what is happening in the country. But there is one nuance in this story. Pivovarov is in prison for carrying out activities of an undesirable organization. I do not really understand what this is, but in fact, he was sentenced for 4 years in prison for 30 posts on Facebook. No, he did not try to overthrow the state system, didn't threaten anyone, only did not agree with the amendments to the constitution, which allowed Putin to remain in power, and also supported the protests in people of Khabarovsk, where the voters came out in support of the governor, who was elected in the elections and who later was released due to the loss of trust of the president of Russia. Of course, it is not good to contradict Putin, but Pivovarov decided to fight the system, for which he received 4 years in prison. At the end of December 2022, he was taken out of the pre-trial detention center in Krasnodar, after which there was no information about his whereabouts, for 2 months. And now communication with Pivovarov is difficult, but Andrei managed to hand over notes about how he was transported from captivity.
I was sent from Voronezh on Sunday, January 8th. The duration of the upcoming transportation can be determined by the number of dry rations that are issued on the road. This time only 3 were issued, and even the convoy reluctantly confirmed we will arrive on Wednesday in the morning. It got colder on the New Year's days, and heating in the prison wagons is a nominal thing. Andrey Pivovarov, Russian political prisoner.
Pivovarov says that during the trip he followed civilian life at stations and on the streets, but mostly communicated with other prisoners. Among them, they were common for any countries convicted for selling drugs, murder and theft, but there were also truly Russian articles. A pseudo-terrorist. In fact, Neighbor did not spread much, which was logical with his terrorist 205th article. He briefly said that he was citing behind the books. The court estimated the love of reading at 10 years, of which 3 years in prison and 7 years of strict regime. And the blogger met a former developer, a person who couldn't have brought money to the country, but instead ended up behind bars.
Valery is over 50, adult children, family, developer. Since the 2010s, he lived in the Czech Republic, but did business in Russia. In one of the regions of the northwest, he bought land and decided to build an apartment building. Everything was going well. Almost all apartments were already sold out. The house should have already been put into operation, and then Valery decided to receive about 20 million rubles from the local authorities, which he was owed by performing some works during the construction process. The work was discussed in advance. They promised to pay, but they did not not want to pay. Valery filed a lawsuit. This action caused offense. Problems began with the Putin interpretation of the house, and behind them a criminal case. He went to court on his own, didn't even take a bag of things with him to the announcement of the verdict, but they put him in the jail for 6 years. While Valery was already waiting for an appeal in prison, and both the house and the land were squeezed out. The new owner had no problems with putting into operation the house. The person, as you see, was the right one. Andrey Pivovarov, Russian political prisoner.
By the way, as Pivovarov himself writes, this scheme for collecting money from developers has been working out and is used everywhere. You wonder who will be imprisoned when all middle-class players are removed from this area. They make good money on this. Appetites are growing. For me also it is interesting that the fact that in each locality the political prisoner was asked what he was being held for, and they learned the details of his imprisonment.
The questions were standard. What kind of article is this? Who am I? Where do I come from? What is the matter? I had already worked out a set of standard answers long ago, not really immersing myself, but not hiding details either. Almost everyone I talked to understood the absurdity of my case. Andrey Pivovarov, Russian political prisoner.
The author himself writes that the penitentiary system in Russia has been made up in such a way as to turn prisoners into a weak-willed, submissive mass. But will this help a person to improve? Will he harbor anger or resentment inside? And most importantly, will he be able to find his place in life after liberation? So far, the percentage of relapses among those who have served their sentences exceeds 40%, and this does not indicate any success. That concludes our today's video. Thank you for staying with us, and keep tuned for other videos. Goodbye.